friends. I am Stephanie Kirk here from Fiveable, and today we're going to look at effective annotations. So drop me a line in the chat. How are you guys feeling about your ability to annotate? What do you think? Any thoughts on annotation at all? Can you guys see this? It seems like I'm having a little bit of a struggle here. Not that great. Okay, well, we are going to absolutely fix that, because today, when we look at effective annotations, we're actually going to look at some strategies. So first, I see that. Thank you so much. Okay, so first of all, the first thing we want to say is this is a stream from Think Fiveable. We are here to support you as you work to get a 5 on your AP exam. So annotations for tonight, we are going to look at some examples from Lang, but this is obviously a skill you can use in all of your classes. So let's get started looking at what you have coming soon. So satire and fallacies, Catherine's going to go over that with you on Saturday at 3. And then next week, we've got some multiple choice review with Kevin, and then current events with Brandon. And I think that current events is something that we often overlook. So make sure you're following up on that, because that's going to help you on question 3. Okay, so what is our learning intention for tonight? Well, our goal is that through the study of different annotation techniques, you are going to be able to effectively annotate a variety of texts in order to help you prepare for the analysis of that text, and then, of course, to build your argument related to the given text. So I just used the word text 1,000 times in there, but our goal here is to look at a way that we can truly understand what's in that passage. So are you with me? Can you give me a thumbs up in the chat? Any questions at all so far? Okay. How are we going to do this? We're going to start with talking about what is annotation. And then I wanted to make sure that I was kind of meeting you guys wherever you are. So we're going to look first at the most basic nonfiction signposts. And then we're going to look at Mortimer Adler's advice. And the reason I selected this text is because across our country, we see so many AP Lang teachers use this text because it's called How to Mark a Book, and it's kind of clever. So we're going to look at that. And then I'm just going to get real with you, and I'm going to say, hey, here are my expectations. Here's what I expect of my students in my classroom. And then as a bonus, we're going to look at annotating the prompt, because that's a part of annotation, and annotation helps us. So are you super excited about what we're doing today? Okay. So just to recap our resources, we are looking at the language of composition just as we have before, but then we're also going to be looking at the reading nonfiction. So this is a text that I use to start my students looking at annotations. And obviously your annotations are going to look very different from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester. And that's kind of where we are with the reading nonfiction, because it does get us started. Has anyone read that book or seen it on your teacher's desk? Okay, so tonight we're actually going to use the Banneker prompt, okay? So I wanted to make sure that you had that Banneker prompt. So just in case you're interested, there's the prompt for you. You see that over there in the chat? Sweet. Okay. So that's going to give you kind of what we're looking at. Now, one of the things the AP Lang team has done here is we've actually said, okay, what are the biggest bang for our buck prompts that we can make happen? And this is one of the ones that all of our AP Lang streamers, whether it's the student streamers or the teacher streamers, this is one that everybody agrees says we need to look at this. So now you have that link, and you can go through and you can kind of address it at any time. So the first step is understanding what in the world is annotation. Well, the idea behind annotation is that it's an active process for critical close reading that involves marking in the text to track claims and evidence, noticings and wonderings, and contradictions and connections, and then other elements that stand out while reading. Now, the big thing is, I'm sure that your teachers in the past have told you, hey, we're going to close read this text, and you need to read it at least 3 times to totally understand it. While that's true for a lot of our reading, you're not going to have time to read it 3 times on the AP exam. So with that said, we need to make sure that we're in the habit of understanding it and analyzing it kind of at the same time. And that's the reason that annotations are so important. So What we want to do is think of annotations as showing your work kind of in math. It's going to help you to see the text, to understand it a little bit better. It's going to track the elements of the text also, so you can revisit or sort information better when you're actually building a response. And that's true for all three questions: the synthesis, the argument, and the analysis. And then it's going to increase your understanding of the more complex segments. Generally, you're looking at that development over time. And if there's a huge chunk of the text that you don't get, you can't pull your evidence from there. So by creating these annotations, you're going to be able to break that down. The next thing is it ensures the evidence comes from multiple places, because rather than skip a huge chunk, you're going to have notes throughout that you can pull. Questions so far? Okay. So here's a sample, because I wanted to show you a few examples as we went through tonight's lesson. And so this is just an example of looking at poems. Have you guys seen many poems in your AP Lang class? Anybody seen a poem at all in your AP Lang class? Typically not the most common. Now, sometimes your teachers will pull those in because we don't want our focus on nonfiction to mean that you don't have the skills from fiction or that you have forgotten them. But this is just an example to kind of let you see what an annotation looks like. Do you think it looks like this person has actually annotated it? Can you give me a sign in the chat that you're with me here? Like thumbs up. Yeah, this person looks like they read it. I think when you go through this, it definitely looks like they went through and read this text. So even if, and you should not do this, but even if you were like with somebody and they needed some help understanding a text, there's a lot of information here for them to gather as they go through it. So here's another example I wanted to show you. Look at this one. You're like, whoa, that's so much. It's so much, isn't it? It really is. This one I love because this one's a sample that was actually done in preparation for the AP exam. So this one was one that was given to the student. And so you can kind of see that they've given themselves a thinking questions and some what if questions over there on the left. You can see on the right, they've identified like dominant strategies and support strategies down at the bottom. This person definitely looks like they've read it. When you look at this, what stands out to you? What is an immediate thing that you look at this example and you're like, hey, I can add this to my annotations? What do you see? The symbols. Absolutely. And I think you're going to see a few of those as we go through. What do you think those symbols are? Do you remember? Opening my sparkling water. Sorry, a little bit of a sore throat today. Do the symbols make any sense? So you have on the upper on that right side, you've got the little circle with the triangle. So you've got your rhetorical situation, your rhetorical triangle, and then inside of that, you've got your little rhetorical appeals. And then down on the bottom, you've got those numbers, the 1, the 2, the 3s, and the 4s. And I think that is aligned with the blue up top, which is obviously the thesis statement that this person's working with. And then that weird chart with the start and end. Have you guys seen that chart on anything before in your class? So when we are looking at this chart, the whole point here is audience movement, because your goal is to figure out the purpose. Like, what is the outcome? What's the so what? And why do I care about whatever text you've been given? And so this helps you to kind of catalog and channel what the author wants and what the author gets at the start, and then moving toward the end. What is the audience movement? So how is the audience going to be at the start of it? And then how are they at the end? And then the strategy or the movement in the middle is what gets them from point A to point B. So I think that's pretty neat. Okay, what about this one? Does it look like this person read it? What do you think? Thumbs up, they read it? Yeah, I agree. They definitely read it. Now, I'm going to zoom in on a part of it because I think that this is pretty standard in a lot of classes. Do you see this acronym up here? DIDLS. Does anyone know what DIDLS stands for? Anybody have any idea what that might possibly stand for in an AP Lang classroom? Okay, so we won't go into much detail about this, but DIDLS it's sort of an older couple of standards ago. Some teachers do still use it. I think it's valid. It's diction, imagery, details, language, and syntax. And this person, in going through and creating those annotations, it was like as they marked off, like as they went through and they found some examples of diction, they marked it off, and they saw some imagery and they marked it off. So you can kind of see that this process helped to build toward the understanding of this text. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to start out with what we see in terms of very basic, very beginner annotations. If I am looking at this text and I feel like I'm placed a little bit out of my league and I don't really know what's going on, where in the world do I start? Because we're often taught how to take notes when we're looking at fiction. But when we jump into like nonfiction and speeches, everybody just says, oh, mark the key ideas. And then give me a thumbs up if your paper's ever been completely yellow, because I'm guilty of that too. I think annotations are a very, very learned skill. So the first thing is contrast and contradictions, absolute or extreme language, numbers and stats, quoted words, and word gaps. And we're actually going to go through and look at these in examples today. And then I'm going to show you an example with that text that I shared the link for, okay, that Banneker prompt. All right, so contrast and contradictions. When a writer presents something that contradicts with something that you already know or you think you know, or when the writer shows you a sharp contrast between the people, the groups, or the ideas. So what you want to ask yourself in your brain is, what is the difference and why does it matter? What does this make me wonder? Chances are the audience is doing the same thing. So if you're looking at trying to build toward analysis of the strategies that get you there, you want to look at the contradiction and the contrast. Okay, so some keywords just in case you need them. In contrast, on the other hand, however, another perspective, or could be implied, something like that. Why should you bother with this? Well, it's the details that are going to point to the central idea or the primary claim or any other aspect of analysis. By the way, do you know what I'm talking about when I say the aspects of analysis? Sweet. If you don't, I have that built in here for you. Next, you want to look at absolute and extreme language. When a writer uses language that seems exaggerated, biased, unrealistic, or just otherwise off, you want to ask yourself a few questions about that. First, why is it being said in this way? And second, what does the author hope to achieve here? Now, you're looking at keywords, all, none, indisputable. There's too much opinion or too much personal perspective. I like to call this eye trouble. And this is found commonly in student essays when they write things like, I think, or I'm going to tell you what Banneker was trying to do in his prompt. No to eye trouble. If you recognize eye trouble, you've got some absolute and extreme language, and you really want to think on that. So why bother? It's going to help you find the places where the author is trying to sway the argument too far in one direction. Sometimes this is unintentional. It's a result of bias. But you want to think about that as you go through. Sometimes it is intentional. They're trying to persuade the audience and they're intentionally pushing it toward one side. And it's your job to analyze the logical fallacies that come from absolute and extreme language. Next would be numbers and stats. When a writer uses specific numbers or number words or statistics or even amounts, you want to ask yourself, why did these numbers get included? And how do they fit in this context? You're looking for specific numbers or general numbers, things like most or over half or 1778 or 3 out of 5, anything like that. Why does this matter? Well, it's going to help you focus on the details that you'll find in the text, and that's going to help you draw conclusions about the claim or the evidence. This is important because it can also hide some faulty logic. For example, every teacher loves to use the 3 out of 5 dentists recommend crest or whatever. And then the reality is we actually surveyed 10 dentists, but those other 5 all said to use this other brand, so we're not going to do that. Well, that's kind of what we're looking for here. But we're also looking at it in terms of, okay, this text is from 1788. That's not too far from 1776. What happened then? So you want to start to think about that as you look through your texts. Next would be quoted words. If you see quotes in a text, it's because a writer is borrowing something from some other source. So you want to ask yourself, why is this person being quoted? What does this quote add to the text overall? You'd look for quotation marks for this. Now, sometimes it might be like a long, drawn-out quote, but then sometimes it might be like a short phrase that's just got those little quotes around it because they've pulled it from somewhere else. Typically, this should be cited. When you quote words, you should cite it as well, even if, like on question 1, the synthesis, you're just putting source A at the end. So why should you do this? It helps to signal personal perspective, an area expert, or a reference to somebody else. It can easily build credibility and validity to whatever the argument is that's being made. The answers to these questions are going to help you figure out the author's perspective and the purpose for that individual text. Are you with me still? The last one is a huge one. Now, I know that you probably never look at a text and you see a word you don't know and you just skip it and move on. Have you ever done that? I see a lot of students do that. But if we just skip it, we're going to miss out on some of the big pieces. If every single word has a purpose, we need to think about what every single word actually is. So if we have a word gap, we're looking for words or groups of words that we don't know. We want to think, do I know this word from somewhere else? Can I find clues in the text that are going to help me figure out what this is? Why bother? Because words are important. And if you miss their meaning, you're going to miss out on the text as a whole. And it would be a tragedy to read a text and to have a completely different understanding from reality. That won't work for you on the AP exam, will it? Okay, so here is that Banneker text using signposts only. Now, I think a moment ago, you mentioned the use of symbols, and we definitely have some on here. So let's look left column down and then over to the right column and down. So what you can see is, first of all, there's 2 colors. The one is kind of a greenish color. It doesn't really show up great, but we've got the purple color. So you can kind of see that suffer is circled. And I think that's circled because it's a word gap, because we typically think of suffer as like a negative thing. But up here, we can see that use meaning allow. So we've got some things that are underlined. This first one, these little letters on the side, when you see that letter on the side, it's referencing which one of those annotation cues we see. So A, we've got this idea of absolute language. Moving down a little bit further, you've got that C, that contrast and contradictions. A little further down, you've got the quote. To the other side, note the use of the underline, but it links by bringing in that diagonal line. What you're seeing here is the contrast that carries throughout those 3 pieces. And then moving down to the bottom, again, we've got that A for that absolute language, and then Q, we've brought in another quote. Down at the bottom, anybody know what this little triangle is that you can see down here? Oh, I hope you know it by now. What you see here is the entire rhetorical situation. Now, this person didn't draw the circle around those triangles, but remember, that circle is going to be your context, purpose, and exigence, okay? So right here, you can see 1791, they've got slavery, 1776 is the revolution. Beneath that on the bottom, you can kind of see the purpose. If you read the description, though, this one actually tells you what the purpose is. And then you can see he's tired of it and he wants change. You can kind of see this speaker, audience, and subject. So we've got that on the outside on that rhetorical triangle. And we can see that it's Banneker. It says this is actually, we're able to see it's the son of a former slave. We can also see just by looking at the background that he is educated. So that's a big thing that's going to help us out. If we look at who the audience is, it is a letter to Thomas Jefferson. He's the Secretary of State, so he's not quite going to be the president yet. And then we can move in up to that subject. What is it? Well, it's slavery. We also know from reading the description before the prompt that it is against slavery. So we can see that connection there. And then we've got the connection to ethos, logos, and pathos, and that connection throughout. Okay, any questions over the annotations for this particular example? Are you with me here? Okay, so now we're going to look at Mortimer Adler's advice. So Mortimer Adler is very interesting. His text is called How to Mark a Book, and he is, well, he's very clever, and I love words, so I can nerd out with you for an hour on just this text, but I won't do it. So he talks about how to properly mark a book and says if you've borrowed the book, you should use sticky notes. So has that ever happened to you? Like you have a book, but you're afraid to write in it? What do you think? Okay, so always put those sticky notes in there. When you put your sticky note in there, your teacher can go through and kind of check it. Now, every teacher, disclaimer, every teacher has a little bit of a different standard, but sometimes students will just take notebook paper and they'll write the page number and they'll write their notes on the notebook paper. In most cases, what your teacher is looking for is, did you read it? And do you appear to have interacted with it and understood what it says? Okay, so in Adler's How to Mark a Book, what you see is he says you need to underline or highlight the major points, the important or forceful statements, and keywords and phrases. That sounds a lot like the signpost, doesn't it? Of course it does. Then we look at this idea of vertical lines at the margin to emphasize a statement that's already underlined. So if it seems like a little bit stronger, you might put some lines in there, okay? And then, this is a great quote, stars, asterisks, or doodads. They need to be used sparingly, but they emphasize the most important statements in whatever it is, okay? Now, he also suggests folding the bottom corner of the page when you use these marks so that you can find them a little bit later. Next, we have numbers in the margin. Now, this would indicate the sequence of points. So when you're writing, you want to talk about things in the order that they occur in the text. Or if you're grouping it by rhetorical purpose, you can do it that way as well. But you would put those numbers in there. And do you remember seeing that example that had the numbers at the bottom? Of course you do. Next, we have the numbers of other pages. Now, typically with your AP Lang, most of the stuff that you're going to see on the test is not going to go over into multiple pages, but you will have books that you look at in class that you might need to go through other pages. So if you're on page 19 and you see something that reminds you of page 7, just write little P7 on the corner, and that helps you. And then, of course, in the margins, you want to write any kind of question or even the answer to those questions that the passage made in your mind. You're reducing a complicated discussion to a simple statement. So you might just write a summary down there and record the sequence of events or main points right there in the book. Any questions on that? So Adler really just takes common sense and puts it with what we've looked at with all of these other ideas. Would you agree? Okay, so real deal. Why does it matter? Well, annotating the text is going to be what helps you to make sure that you understand it. And then if you need to go to your teacher or even to a classmate and say, hey, I'm not sure I got this, the first thing I always ask for is annotations, because I want to see where you are and what your thought process is for your understanding before I do anything else. And you can ask anyone in my class. The last thing I'm going to do is give you an answer. I need to make sure that you're on the right track and that you can think through it. So I'll ask you questions along the way, and your annotations are a good place to start for those questions. So what exactly do I look for? I look for the rhetorical aspects in your annotations. You should be annotating it for audience. Who is it directed toward? When you're looking at audience, there are actually a minimum of two. First, you have your intended audience, and then second, you have your secondary. So for example, with this one, what we looked at is an actual letter to an actual person, right? Okay, so the next element that you want to think about is the unintended one. So for example, if someone writes an open letter to the school district and puts it in the newspaper, obviously they're hoping that the school district is going to read it, but they also want everyone else who's reading that paper to read it. So that's a big deal. Another one might be if you're giving a speech at, say, a gala, and somebody films it, and then you end up the next viral, go-get-em motivational speaker. Well, that's a secondary audience. Even if it's unintended, it's still there. Then you want to think about speaker. Now, speaker can be like literally the person who's speaking it, or it can be the persona that's involved with it. So you might have to be a different person depending on who it is that you're talking to. Next would be the purpose. The purpose, I'm sorry, my caged dog is apparently, my normally well-trained dog is flipping out because there's someone in the front yard. Hope it doesn't bother you too much. So the purpose is the reason for which they're writing. Now, the AP writers, when they put this test together and these texts together, what you're going to see is that the synopsis they give you at the very beginning is really going to help you out as you go through the text, okay? Exigence is probably the new one. That's the occasion. It's the what, why now? Like what drove this person to be active in this exact moment? Next is going to be your context, historical, social, and cultural elements that drive the force of this text. So with Banneker, when we looked at this idea of slavery, you kind of saw those pieces come into place. Next is going to be the tone. So what is the tone of the text? How does he say it? Well, Adler sort of has like a little joking factor in his, but does Banneker sound like he's joking? I don't think so. And then finally, it's going to be the strategies. So if you think back to that text that had the chart at the bottom, the before and the after, and then that movement column in the middle, those are the strategies that are being used to create movement toward achieving the author's purpose. Okay, so you can see I use the word aspects, but some of your teachers are probably using Space Cat because that's like the big one that just went viral. Are you familiar with Space Cat if you don't use aspects? Nice. Another one that you might find. Okay, well, if you haven't heard it yet, you might. But what about SOAPSTONE? Are you familiar with SOAPSTONE? So all of these acronyms can really help you as you go through and you look at how in the world you did that in history. That's a good one to do in history. That one helps you out big picture too. So as you're going through and you're looking at all of these little pieces and you're kind of figuring out what in the world is this text about, whatever acronym your teacher gives you for analysis, you can put those letters in the side, just like the example I showed you a moment ago. Are you with me so far? Can I have a thumbs up? Yes. Okay. So what are my expectations? So in my class, I'm looking for lines across the paragraphs that show chunks or shifts. So when you are reading a text, you want to think, what is the rhetorical purpose? So, and we'll look at this in just a second with that Banneker prompt. Looking at that first paragraph, what in the world is he talking about? What's happening in this first paragraph? But in some texts, it's more than just a single paragraph. When you are reading it and you start to think, okay, topic change. Well, obviously paragraphs mean topic change. There's like 4 rules for a new paragraph and topic change is the number 1, or passage of time would be the number 2. So you do see those, but sometimes it's more about other elements that you see. Next, you're looking for the argument, the claims, and the evidence. So every single text is going to have a primary. That's going to be that big picture, the one up at the top, right? But in addition to having that primary claim, they're going to have little pieces that go into it. So we like to think of these as claims and evidence. Now, if you've ever written an essay, which I assume you've written like 1 or 2 by now, you are going to be looking at this in terms of what is your first reason and then the evidence behind that. So just like when you're building your topic sentence and your evidence and your commentary in there, you want to look for those things in the readings. Now, it's not a bad idea to look for a topic sentence, but at this point in your educational career, the first sentence of the paragraph may not be the topic sentence. That may not even be what we're really looking at. The next part is E, L, and P. Never, 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 never write your rhetorical analysis on the use of ethos, logos, and pathos. It might be the holy trinity in terms of rhetorical appeals, but it's not going to work for you when you're writing to this particular audience in the AP world. Instead, what you want to look at is labeling ethos, logos, and pathos. You've got that right. Can I get some confirmation down here? Promise me, say I am not going to write an essay and have 1 paragraph on ethos, 1 on logos, and 1 on pathos. Can I have some clarification down here in the chat? Promise? Thank you so much. You should promise your teacher too. Yes. Okay. Don't do that. It's a terrible idea. But what you can do as you read is make notes. Because if you're going to structure your paper in terms of rhetorical purpose, by annotating for ethos, logos, and pathos, your brain is starting to see these things. Now, you don't actually have to label the device, okay? Now, if your teacher says label the device, I'm not going to go against your teacher. But if you can describe what the person is doing, that's really what we're looking for. So if you can say that Banneker is repeating the use of sir to show respect and build credibility to his perspective because he knows he's writing to Thomas Jefferson, you can do that. So you would write down E, L, and P in the passage so you can identify areas where those key details are being reached. Where do you see ethos? If you want to write about ethos, you can bring that in and you can say the author builds credibility because although he is the son of a former slave and very educated, he has a view unlike that of Thomas Jefferson. Or depending on your background, you might say Thomas Jefferson understands the use of slavery and is bringing that element in. So you can kind of see what that looks like. Logic is going to be something that you hopefully see a lot through any text that you have to read in your AP course. But pathos is another element that you can think of. So by tracking E, L, and P, you're going to be able to start to notice the rhetorical function and the way these ideas come together. And that's always exciting. Next, it's going to be the rhetorical elements, okay? So if you see examples, concessions, faulty logic, any device that your teacher actually does want you to know by name, you can put that down and mark that in your text. That's going to be a huge help as you move forward because you're going to essentially lump all of these structures and strategies together in some kind of way so that you can build together your essay surrounding those ideas. Next is the literary elements. Now, you may not necessarily have like plot, for example, in this class, but it is possible that someone's going to use a narrative mode as they try to persuade you of something. Maybe they use an anecdote. So little elements like that can help you because you're trying to think about what are they trying to say and why are they saying it this way? How do they work to try and create that movement? Next, you're going to look at symbolism or theme or foreshadowing, anything like that that sort of stands out. And then diction. When you're looking at diction, you're looking at the effective or unusual word choice, okay? This includes figurative language, all of those pieces that have to do with intentionality behind your words. So if you've ever read The Giver and we talk about the precision of language, then you know right here we're looking at the importance of connotation and denotation. And sometimes we use a word intentionally because we want to have a positive effect or a negative effect. So annotating for diction and recognizing patterns behind reoccurring negativity or positivity throughout that text, that's going to be a huge thing to help you. And next would be structure. You're looking at the relationship between the ideas and the progression of ideas. So it's how these pieces, how these segments play together. And this one actually connects back up to that idea of showing those chunks or showing those shifts. And then overall, the tone. How does that tone work in the text? Okay, so down here in the chat, because I feel like that's a lot of little me talking. Down here, can you tell me, where do you feel now? Do you feel a little bit better about your ability to annotate or even to understand what in the world you're looking for while you're annotating? Excellent. I'm so excited for you guys. I know I kind of nerd out and get really excited. So it's a true thing. This thing is looking at rhetoric and the words. It's so amazing. Now, if you're starting and you think back to what you saw with the Banneker prompt a little while ago. Remember, it had the triangle on the bottom. There wasn't a lot of writing on the side, was it? So I want you to think about those two. Does this one look like the person read and understood it a little bit more than the previous example? What do you think? Can you tell me? Okay. With this text, you can kind of see up in the corner, this person was looking at aspects and it's annotated up on the side to remind them to look for that. And then you can kind of see the letters standing out. So I'm also going to point out that this annotation includes the prompt. Can you see that? Whereas before the person went right to the text and started going, this person took the time to annotate through the prompt. And that's really important because do you remember what the prompt gives you? The background, absolutely. So here you have that speaker information. So you can just kind of see the lines going straight across. You've got that speaker, a little bit more about the speaker a little bit later. You've got your so you got a little bit of context here for you, 1791. You can see the audience. He wrote it to Thomas Jefferson. And then you can see his purpose to argue against slavery. This person who annotated the prompt is going to have a much better understanding going in because they already know immediately some of the most important things. First of all, who it's going to, and then second of all, it's looking at that specific purpose, his argument against slavery. And if you know that you struggle with higher levels of writing and reading, then being able to know what purpose you're looking for is really important. So let's look over here at these paragraphs, okay? So you can kind of see on the left that this person has definitely gone through and read it. They've circled things like, sir, suffer me. Note the way that this person didn't circle it up in the passage, but they circled allow down at the bottom. So that shows you that they've really processed it and they're really looking at what these words mean. So you can kind of see that underlining the arms and tyranny of the British Crown. You can see a little bit more reducing you to a state of servitude. I hear things there that really kind of bring in some ideas. And then it says, I entreat you. So you can see some very specific things. But note what this person did. In annotating it on the left-hand side over there in the margin, this person wrote, remember your plight. That's pretty interesting because what they've done here is kind of summarize the key ideas. Now, as you go down and you looked at the bottom, you see this idea of a long sentence, okay? Why would it be worth noting that it's a long sentence? What do you think? Why does it matter? Absolutely, that is syntax. This one is also, when we look at it and we look at all of the pieces, yep, it does. It leads to tone. It can. So you can see with this big, long sentence, these big, long words, how does Banneker seem to feel about the situation? What did you notice when you were going through the text? He's comparing himself back to the actual slave experience. And he's drawing that parallel between, hey, you remember the American Revolution? Yeah, you remember when those tanks and things were here in your backyard? Well, what you felt they were doing to you is kind of what you're doing now. So rather than just coming out and saying that, at least here, he says, do you remember how you felt when this was happening to you? And so we see that connection throughout. Okay. So then in that paragraph, the next paragraph down, we have this idea, hey, you know what it's like. In case you don't remember your plight, I'm going to go through and connect this to you and help you see what your plight is before. Okay. So you can see that connection. Transitioning down, note the circles of those words that you can kind of see what you're looking at here so that you can see where it's going. So down here, we have him using the words against you. Now, I do want to point out the use of the quotation mark here because what we see is he says, this worthy to be recorded and remembered in all succeeding. And then he brings in that quote. We hold these truths to be self-evident. So the use of the quote here stands out because, of course, it is allusion, but he's also using those words against him. Okay, so as you go down the next lane, as you go down kind of that next lane in the next paragraph, you see a few more ideas, okay? So you yourselves were thus to declare, and we see proper ideas, very intentional word choice, all marked. And then over on the other side, we see something there too. I think I might have to stop and let this dog out. I'm not sure what these kids are doing in the front yard. They're not my kids, but all right. So you can kind of see this idea of you were right. And then note this connection. Now, this was the big idea of that contradict and the comparison that we saw in the previous example. So here we have, this is what you were doing, and this is you. And at the same time, you're guilty. He says, you're denying us. You are doing this to us. And so you can kind of see that. Note the annotations here for ouch and harsh. So you can see these ideas between, there's a direct stab being made here, making a clear connection to, hey, this is what's going on. All right. So as you kind of look through, you can see another allusion that comes in, this idea of Job and another quote. Again, quotes were one of those things that were referenced from the nonfiction signpost. So you can kind of see the connection that you need to make there. And then, of course, at the very end was the call to action, that last piece that you kind of see what you're looking for with the text. Note at the bottom the annotations that happened here. You kind of see this B and this T, and we're going to explain that here in just a second. Ringo, stop. Okay, so are you guys totally distracted? Do you want me to like stop and go let the dog out in the backyard? You're good. Is it nice seeing that we're dog people here? Okay, so we looked at our learning intention. We looked at annotations, we looked at the signpost, and we looked at Adler's advice, okay? So we looked also at Ms. Kirk's expectations. So what is the next piece? Well, the next piece is annotating the prompt. What do we see in terms of what the prompt gives us, and how in the world does annotating the prompt help us out? So I want you to kind of remember these things. Now, I always tell my students that we need to bat the prompt. So AP helps you out. It establishes your purpose most of the time. It will establish the purpose for you, and then that can drive your annotations of the stimulus text. So you're looking at background. What is the important context that they've given you? What is the prior knowledge that you know that's going to help you here? Now, I'm going to caution you just a little bit here. When you are looking at the background, what you don't want to do, promise me you're not going to do this. What you do not want to do is go through in terms of your prior knowledge and then write this beautiful essay on your prior knowledge and not address the rhetorical purpose. That won't help you in the long run, okay? So then you want to think about the advice. What is the advice that they give you, whether it's direct or implicit? Now, when we talk about advice, pretty much every prompt is going to say, in a well-developed essay, do this. Make sure that you include your sources, or in the synthesis, cite your sources using source A and B and whatever. So you kind of have that advice, but you also have other advice that you are going to come up with, or that you're going to remember from your teacher as you're progressing through that text. So the task becomes, what in the world are you going to do about what you've been given? So here's an example where we're going to bat the prompt. This is a synthesis one, so I wanted you to see that this isn't just something that we look at with rhetorical analysis or argument. It does address all of the elements. So you can see that background here is kind of underlined. You can see the advice that's given to you, and you can see the tasks. So you've got the annotations here of B, A, and T as you go through that text. And then note at the bottom what this person did when they were annotating it. Do you see what they've done? They marked the task. They need to look at the key issues and the implications for the community. All right, so what are we looking at next? Here's another prompt, okay? Same thing. You want to annotate and do it with that B-A-T. Do you remember what the B is? Can you show me down in the chat what B stands for? What's the first step you've got to look for? Background, absolutely. And so that's going to give you not just the background on the person from the prompt, but you want to think about what that you have. Your prior knowledge, okay? So remember, it's not just the background in terms of this specific prompt, but it's the prior knowledge you have that's going to help you to understand the context. Not a whole essay about whatever background and prior knowledge you've got, but something that's going to help you with the specific context of that specific situation. Do you remember what T is? That's the next one up here. What's the T stand for? Task, absolutely. That's the specific thing that you're looking for and what you want to do with the prompt that they have given you. What is A? Absolutely. Okay, so you've got your background, which includes prior knowledge. You've got your advice, what they are suggesting you to do. Now, why in the world would you want to follow their advice? Big ideas there? Yeah, because they're the ones grading it, right? So you've got to consider your rhetorical situation when you're writing it as well. So you've got your background, you've got your advice, and then you've got your task. Now, I do think it's interesting right here, the brackets that were put around the question, what, if anything, is the value or function of such polite speech? Why do you think that is in brackets? It says T beside it, but why is that in brackets, you know? So that's the essential question that you're looking at here. It's giving you what you need to figure out. What is your purpose? So question 3 is the argument. So your argument here, your task is write an essay in which you describe or analyze the value or function of polite speech. And then down at the bottom, in that last little bit, you kind of see that you can pull it. Here's some advice. Use appropriate evidence and pull it from reading, experience, or observations. Okay? All right, a little bit of extra information. Are you guys familiar with Hugo? Have you mentioned that? Has your teacher mentioned that? Not yet? That's okay. That's more from synthesis. And typically teachers save synthesis for the very end because synthesis requires that you've put together all of the pieces from along the way. So that's kind of what we're going to see as you progress through in your semester or in your year, if you're lucky enough to have a year-long class. So when we send out, like I'll send out a follow-up email and let you kind of see what some of these acronyms are, because I think Rehugo is a valuable one to look at, but we'll get into that if you're following us on the streams when we talk about synthesis. Okay, what prompt do you bet's next? What do you think? Oh, too far. It's Banneker. It's Banneker next. Okay, so here you can see this one has been analyzed as well. One thing that's interesting about this one is it's question 2. Remember, question 2 is, in your head, did you just say rhetorical analysis? I hope you did. So question 2 is rhetorical analysis. So what you can see here is they've given this, it says B for background. B is for background. And so you can kind of see this idea of Benjamin Banneker, the son of former slaves, and then it goes through what he was, and then it tells us the background of the fact that in 1791, he wrote this letter to Thomas Jefferson, who's kind of a big deal. Maybe you've heard of him. And then it goes through and it tells you, what is the advice? Well, advice is the one that they might give you a lot, but they might not give you a lot. And in this one, you don't have very much, but you do have your task. Analyze how Banneker argues against slavery. If you do not skip this box, that would be like the best thing ever. Will they always give advice? So they'll always give advice because the AP guide uses this formulaic fill in the blank structure. So if you go back in the replays and you find the AP language and composition exam overview, I actually show you the fill in the blank. It's called like a slate question. And so it does give you some degree of advice, but not always the same amount. So I think in your mind, you should just know that it's going to say, read it. It's going to say, use evidence that you choose wisely. And then it's going to say, like if it's synthesis, it might say, cite it. If it's rhetorical analysis, it might tell you to cite it. So you kind of get these little pieces like that, but it's not going to give you a huge amount. But don't skip this part, because this is going to be where you find the advice. And then some of the advice is going to come from common sense. So for example, I'll use the overrated question. Probably not in your best interest to say that College Board is overrated in an essay you're writing to the College Board. Okay. So some of that does kind of come from common sense. But do you feel a little bit better about your ability to annotate a prompt now? How do you feel? Can you show me in the chat? Thumbs up if you got it. Excellent. There's actually a stream that's scheduled for later in the semester that is looking at analyzing the prompt. So you'll get much more detailed instruction on what that looks like if you're following that stream, if you subscribe to our AP Lang emails and updates. What practice book do you recommend? Actually, I don't have a specific book for this year, and I'm really glad that you asked that question, and here's why. So the standards changed for this year, and it came out, to be very honest with you, like our sample essays were supposed to be out by, I think the original date was August the 15th or September the 15th, and it kind of got postponed and postponed and postponed. So the standards did change. So no, I don't know right this moment. I'm gonna qualify this. Qualifiers are important in the AP Lang world too. So it is September the 16th at 7:50 p.m. in the Eastern time zone. As of right this moment, I am unaware of any test prep book that is modified to the new standards. Okay. I don't know of anything. So I would suggest that you stay with Fiveable. Keep following us. Let us work with you. Do your AP classroom stuff with your teacher. Go through it. Ask your teacher, hey, are we doing the new units or not? Teachers had the choice to adopt it. And then it's really a document intended for the teachers. But I think if every student reads the course description, you're going to have a much better idea of what's going on. I personally go through and I use that, and I use the Summer Institute, because every teacher has the opportunity to go to Summer Institute and re-sign up. It's really I think it's fun, but we get the opportunity to go through and actually write the essays that you guys did or that our previous class did. We get the opportunity to do multiple choice tests and kind of see it. So I think that the best way to prepare is going to be to look at your Fiveable stuff, follow us, see what's coming out. You can follow, I've got this in here later. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm always posting stuff out there. You can really pull any of those previous examples, but the multiple choice is going to be the biggest thing that I see as a need for change of instruction, because you're going to have now multiple choice questions that assess you in thinking about a writer. So that's a great question. But right this second, I don't have a practice book that I recommend because they're not written. I do not know of one at the current moment that is written based on today's standards. Okay. So I'm sorry, you won't judge me, will you? Okay, so our bonus was annotating the prompt, because I do think that that is a very valid thing. So we talked about several different things. Your signposts were kind of like that. If you don't know where you are, start here. And then we looked at Adler, and Adler kind of gave us a humorous view of what we should look at. And then we looked at a very real perspective of what I expect in my class. And we talked about how I have my students annotate for aspects, but other teachers use soapstones. You saw the example with DIDLS. So you have all of those little pieces along the way. And annotating the prompt was with BAT. So what are you thinking right now? Our learning intention was that through the study of annotation techniques, you'd be able to effectively annotate a variety of texts to prepare for the analysis of the text and to build an argument related to the given text. So how do you feel about that? Do you feel a little bit better? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is like, I have no clue. I just wasted an hour of my life. Stephanie Kirk, you need more direction. Or 5 is like, I have got this. I'm rocking it out. What do you think? Where do you stand? Excellent. I love that. I love that. Well, it's still new in the semester. So you'll have a lot of opportunities to practice these skills as you move forward with your teacher. And then, of course, in all of our streams, like annotations are something that we're going to look at. Okay. Hey, I'm really glad you appreciated it. You know what? We're going to work on it and keep going. Okay. But let me remind you real quick before you head out. Let me remind you of what we've got coming up. Okay. Satire and fallacies with Catherine. And then next week, multiple choice with Kevin and current events. And then actually on Saturday, this one's intended for teachers, but I put it in there, reading for skill rather than content with Ashley Johnson. So you can kind of see we've got a lot of big things happening for you. This is me. I am Stephanie Kirk. I am an AP teacher in Blount County, Tennessee. I am also working for Fiveable, helping to stream AP language and composition to help you on your way to a 5. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll stay here for just a moment, and then I'll send you a follow-up email, and you can pull up through your Fiveable app. You should be able to see the slides, the documents that we've looked at. I would encourage you to forget what we talked about with Banneker, read that text, annotate it on your own, and then compare your annotations to the annotations in the presentation. Any thoughts, last-minute ideas? Should you be concerned that your class hasn't written any essays a month into school? Well, I think you should talk to your teacher about that. Chances are what you're looking at is they're probably breaking it down in terms of claims and evidence and that sort of thing. So you can pull in those little pieces for it in that manner. If they're doing the units, you might be writing paragraphs or something like that, and that would work different. If you're using Soapstone, I think that's a good start to get going through your texts. Is Soapstone what you did in your English too, or in your previous English? I know some people do AP Lang at the senior year. Thoughts on that? Lots of Space Cat. Yeah, that one blew up actually on a forum for AP Lang teachers, and so it's pretty great. Soapstone, absolutely. Okay, you just started. Okay, so Soapstone is essentially the same way. You're looking at the speaker, the occasion, which is similar to exigence, audience, purpose, subject, And then tone is what's the tone of the passage overall. So you can go through and annotate those specific elements. And then I think I had one more question. Oh, okay. So the app they have run so many updates, you guys. Fiveable is growing so much every day. I'm constantly amazed by it. So the app was actually, I think the app is not being used right now in the App Store, but it will come back, I'm sure, at some point. But I think it's like the website for it is like app.fiveable.me, right? Okay. Does that answer all the questions? Anything else? I do have your emails when you signed up. If you signed up, I do have your email, so I should be able to send you one. It will take a little while because I will download the video and then I'll go through and upload it through to Fiveable, and then I'll just make sure that you have everything through there. And then my next stream is actually going to be a teacher stream. So, but you guys should definitely follow out, look at some of the other streams that are coming up, make sure you're reading those announcements, and then interact. Go into Fiveable and see if there's documents or anything like that you want to pull. Okay. Any other questions? Hey, bye, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful night. I look forward to seeing you in the next stream.